Welcome back to the Built Different podcast. Fellas, great to see y'all again. Another week, another fun conversation of all things going on in the world. Adam, looking good. Whereabouts is Waldo this week?
Ooh, this week I'm bumming around the North Lake Tahoe area. About to be doing some epic skiing. We had a great powder day last week, which I'm pretty pumped about. This week, ooh, good shout out. Didn't even tell you this, Grant. One of our superintendent community members, Mr. Garrett Bunting, is out here in Tahoe. So
Hey,
I'm probably going to meet up with him at some point this week and get some more snow time in. Maybe crack a couple cold ones. It's going to be
I
good.
thought we talked about not talking about you being in a better spot than my 8x16 shed. So on to Brian, who's working for the fire department now. Brian, how we doing down there? It looks like you're hunkered in a bunker.
Always got to support Boston Fire. So I'll be doing the opposite of Adam at about this time next week. I'll be sandboarding in the deserts of Peru.
Nice.
So we'll be. Maybe I'll call in from a dune buggy or something like that. But
Yeah,
we'll
I'm
figure it out.
We do the
quickly.
same thing.
Yeah, just putting an end to this, fellas. Sorry, we're not talking about what we're doing. Maybe I shouldn't start and lead with that. So yeah, Mr. Jarvis, we got a new face in here. Good to see you, buddy. Glad you could make it in, and
Yeah.
we're gonna highlight some Jarvis love here. But good to see you, man. Where in the world are you tuning in from?
So I'm over in Star Valley, Wyoming. It's about an hour and a half south of Jackson Hole. Lots of snow. I mean, come on over, Adam. Let's go skiing.
Yeah. All right. Well, now we really are officially putting me in the bucket of not coolest places in the world in flattest place on earth, Dallas, Texas. So, all right, fellas. Well, we're going to have some fun today and not talk about what it is that we're doing out there. And we're going to have some cool conversations. First, with a new face, we got to talk about what's going on out there. And let's run things down here of what we're going to hit on. And first, we got a new host. So let's dive into this here. And Mr. Jarvis is going to tell us a little bit about his background. Always fun to have four. And we'll give a little context to him and joining the team and what it is that we're going to be chatting about. And then new hardware. Can't look left or right without seeing new stuff. I feel like it's kind of the post-Christmas season, you know, when you guys get all the gifts and then you realize, no, I wish I really would have asked for that. And now new tech and hardware is out there. So we'll hit that, and then we'll kind of round it out with just some thoughts. And Adam and I were on the road about just scalable growth. Went and visited quite a few job sites last week, and just some themes and topics and thoughts that came up from that. But first and foremost, Jarvis, not to be confused with the actual Jarvis from Iron Man. I've not met another Jarvis before, and so this is going to be fun. And I'm excited to kind of hear a little bit about your story. I've known you for quite some time, but also recognize I've not known you in some of the ways in which you got to the path here. So I'm going to kick it over to you and just give a little background about you and kind of the roles and hats that you've worn over your time in your career. And then I'm sure this will turn into quite the roast session of Mr. Jarvis here of what we don't know. So yeah, kick it over to you, buddy.
All right. Yeah, my name is Jarvis Wharton. Graduated from college and then moved down to Dallas, Texas, over in that flat spot where you're mentioning, Grant. It actually was really fun, dude. But
it is
just
fun.
Totally different than my upbringing.
I give it a bad rap. I actually really enjoy it. We'll have to do a whole nother episode on the things you could do in Dallas. But Wyoming, I mean, let's be real, way better.
Yeah, I do love the national park, national, public land being like 80% of the state compared to the inverse in Dallas. So yeah. Definitely enjoy that.
What's funny is I think when we were talking the other day on here, it's like, oh yeah, what's out your window? And you're like, oh, the Tetons, no big deal. Just casually looking out our window here. But yeah, walk us through so your background from the industry to construction. You've been at other startups. You're now with the drone deployed. Man, you've gone, not to put it on a map here, but just cross-country tour of all sorts, which that's where we first met, was really when you were down here in Dallas, and some fun stuff. But yeah, give us a little tour of Mr. Wharton here, of the roads and path that led you to here.
Yeah, sweet. So I interned with a general contractor out of Dallas, Rogers O'Brien, back in 2014, and then worked for them after college in 15. And then, worked on a behavioral health hospital and really got into the drone stuff, really just kind of trying to figure out how to do things better, different than what we were doing. And had an opportunity with a previous coworker from Rogers O'Brien to go start up the field technology group in DPR's Dallas office. So made a jump a little bit over a year after initially starting down there, and worked on a few jobs. I mean, the Facebook data center down there in Dallas, Fort Worth, had a lot of fun on that, kind of bringing in laser scanning and drones and 360 cameras back before we had like the cool Insta 360s and stuff, like just strapping GoPros together, zip tying them and trying to make an actual 360 photo. And then built a high rise in Dallas, Texas. And then a couple friends of mine started a company called Project Atlas in 2018 is when I joined, but they've been kind of baking it for the last couple of years. So I jumped from the GC side of stuff over to the vendor side of things at Project Atlas, which our whole thing wanted to be the Google Maps for construction. We wanted to show the spatial filing cabinet of construction drawings being where they should be, drone stuff where it should be, 360 photos, all illustrated in its kind of place and time and space. And then after 6 months, we got bought out by Bluebeam. So it was cool. It was an unexpected internal jump from vendor to vendor. So I stayed at Bluebeam with kind of that transition team for about 6 months. And then a really good friend of mine that I worked with the DPR on that Facebook data center called and said, hey, you want to come start our drone program, 360 camera reality capture stuff at Jacobs Engineering? So jumped from the vendor side, not to the GC side, over to the architect engineering design side. So that was a heck of a lot of fun. Did that for about 3.5 years. And then through COVID, just traveled because remote job sites were kind of a interest, and Jarvis was the guy to fly around and build those for people. So yeah.
Man, I feel like it's funny, when I was looking at your LinkedIn, I had to click expand because of the road that you've gone through. And it's crazy to think like just how, it's funny, I give Adam a hard time for the gray hair, and I may transition that to you here, but it's crazy to think like GC to industry to acquisition back to industry, then back to really the tech side. And I think what's just awesome, what I've loved about your story is like just the people that you've met along the way. I mean, you obviously have gotten to work at some amazing companies, and we were even joking before we started recording this of just your history with certain people. And yeah, I mean, like what stands out from kind of that journey to and from? And I mean, I know you've taken a ton of lessons learned from each parts of those, but yeah, is there anything that just like stands out from the people side of it in kind of the journey that you've had?
Yeah, for me, it's been a lot about the network that I built. So every job hop has been instigated by some friend, some network relationship that I've had that I worked with previously, that we just hit it off and really wanted to dive in deeper with stuff. So, the jump over to DPR was with a friend from Rogers O'Brien. The jump to Project Atlas was with some friends from Rogers O'Brien. And then the jump to Jacobs Engineering was with a friend from DPR back in the day. And just the different, playing on the different sides of the industry, it's been interesting for me to see, when you're on the tech side, when you're on the industry side, like how agile we can be. Like if a customer says we've got X problem, where we need to pivot and see X deliverable, or we need to see this report in this format, like we've got the capability and the agility within the company to make that happen. Versus the industry, we kind of have these big adoption phases. I was chatting with a buddy last week, and he was like, just moving from paper, which thousands of years in construction, paper has been the thing. Like
Papyrus,
the transition from
think,
that to an iPad is like, yeah, he was like, it was like 10 years to try and get companies, the majority of companies, to go into digital docs. And so as we've seen that, and then we see drones and we see the reality capture, like that adoption progression, that adoption window has gotten accelerated even smaller and smaller. So it'll be really cool to see what happens in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, I've been grilling you with questions, but I know Brian and Adam have a few. I'll ask one more and turn my mic over to them. But like, yeah, is there anything, this is kind of a strange question that just came to mind. Like, is there any spot that you wish maybe you would have stayed at longer, or you feel like you were like really just starting to kind of like turn a corner in something and a new opportunity popped up? Like, it's interesting, the diversity of places that you have been. And, we talk a lot about on here, like right tool, wrong time of, you were doing some great stuff and maybe the timing of it just didn't quite, pan the way it should. But yeah, is anything that like, when you look backwards that you're like, oh man, we were really onto something, whether it was implementing on the industry side or the tech, side of it too. Anything stand out from that front?
Yeah, I think the biggest, not regret or anything, but the biggest look back for me to say, man, I wish that would have accelerated quicker or taken off faster would be the Project Atlas stuff. So, Google Maps for construction is like a huge endeavor. You think about the uptick for Google to go from a search engine to an integration in pretty much every facet of our lives. Like that's kind of what we were trying to tackle at Atlas. And to see it still hasn't come to fruition, it's like, man, I wish we just had a little bit more time that we could push a little harder, because we see a lot of tech companies moving into that. Where is this built? When is this built? Kind of format of organizing data as opposed to the traditional file format. And that was kind of our vision back in 2018. So yeah, that's probably the biggest, man, I wish sort of thing.
I was hoping you would allude to that, because that was definitely one that stood out as, man, I think that was probably one of the first times you and I met, was like a very early beta tester of like, hey, what do you think about this? And I just was like, man, this is so many years ahead of its time. Like we were just coming out of like the second or third generation iPads, and I was like, man, this is definitely right tool. Hope to be right time. And I was talking with these guys too, of just like other episodes and content that I think would be really interesting that we could put out here, and almost the anatomy of an acquisition. Like that was a fascinating time for Project Atlas, of like how you guys went from just a ton of excitement and buzz of the industry with, the two guys that started that and what you were obviously doing on the team, and to the change that brought, and all the in-betweens, which is a huge bookend of that story. But yeah, Adam, I'll turn it over to you. Any questions for Jarvis before we kind of transition in?
I don't know what our age difference is, but I definitely feel like not the oldest guy on this podcast anymore. That's for sure. You have quite the resume. Definitely the extensive history. Jump in there. I'm going to steal a quote from one of our old buddies or one of Grant's old buddies that we had on the podcast a while back. We're in the people business, and we just happen to be building buildings too. And I think that highlights a lot of what you're talking about with your jumps from place to place and following friends, and just the network that you've built over the course of your career. I think that's pretty badass, and I think that you bring a lot of great experience, and it's been fun getting to know you a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things. I think we live in an industry in construction where you've got those lifers and companies and stuff that they stay in the GC side, they go on that track of superintendent or project director or project manager. And so for me, like, there's been the VDC group, but reality capture is kind of my thing. Not really, I'm not a modeler. I'm not a CAD guy or anything by any stretch, but just reality capture was so early that I kind of had to make these jumps in order to kind of keep abreast of what was happening. So that's been fun to see. And then now to look back and say, man, almost every single company's kind of got these reality capture solution teams that is moving forward. It's cool to see that come to fruition.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mr. Viz, any thoughts for our man Jarvis?
I think that's such a good point, because at the time you're talking about, the strapping GoPros together, VDC and tech manager was one role, AKA it was the the VDC managers inheriting another role, no extra pay, no extra, figure out how to bill it. And it's good to actually see those kind of divide into almost, same umbrella project services nonetheless. And I think one other thing you talked about was the adoption and time horizon for adoption. And it's so funny because people think about everything in terms of the project time. So if a project has already started, it's like, hey, we'll do this on the next one. You don't rip and replace something mid-project. Whereas like in a tech company, if you need to change your CRM, there's not like a great time to do it, because there's ongoing every day. So no, I'm excited. And then also, I think if you just add a little bit of a comb over, you could be Adam's stunt double, or maybe the reverse. Did you guys match today on purpose, or what was that?
Almost.
What was that about?
Almost. What's this called?
Just a little this.
I'm feeling the goatee a little bit more than the full beard. I mean, I think that's a good look.
I like that.
How quickly the tides turn here. Jarvis, it's been real, man, but you're out.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll see you later.
Yeah, there we go. It is awesome. I mean, obviously your pedigree speaks for itself, Jarvis. It's pretty cool, man. I think just looking back, and I mean, obviously you highlighted a lot of the people, and that is a huge part of it, but just the things that you've gotten to almost be a mentee under. I mean, I know you have a ton of mentors that have been at each of those companies and in roles, and relationships that you've, continued to flourish and grow just over those years. And I don't know, I'm excited for our listeners because, yeah, you definitely bring an added level of, I think, just experience and wisdom in a lot of these areas that I know a lot of our folks listening in just appreciate is, just those thoughts of like, hey, should I make a move? What does that look like? What do I need to do here? What are some extra things that maybe I, hadn't considered or thought about? And all questions that I think you can answer in a lot of ways that we're going to chat through. So yeah, man, excited to have you on. And
another question that I just thought about and ruined your outro there. I'm sorry, pal. But Jarvis, what's been kind of your biggest takeaway, considering how many, staying predominantly in the tech side of things, whether at construction companies or at, startups, what's been sort of your experience with tech adoption at the field level? Like, how have you seen that from your different roles? I think that's a cool point, and leave it to me. I'm going to bring it back to the field level stuff, but yeah, curious what your experience on that is.
Yeah, I think for me, that's always been my focus, because as a field guy, wanting to adopt tech and not having, 360 cameras weren't a readily available thing. Struction site didn't exist until a few years into my career, all this stuff. Like if tech adoption happens at the field level first, then it's going to get pushed upwards and very, very, very quickly. Because if you got a superintendent, a project engineer, and a PM that want drones or want 360 capture on their jobs, like they're going to get it. They're going to pay for it on the job. And then other projects are going to see it and they're going to say, well, we want that too. And then it just goes like wildfire, as opposed to, man, there's a technology director that says, drone deploy is the coolest thing and we need to adopt that. Who's going to do it? Where do we put that in the budget? Who's going to fly? Who's going to get trained? We've seen a lot of kind of kickback and pushback, I guess is probably a better word, of, well, we've got a PE that's, up to his ears in work with RFIs and submittals and stuff. He doesn't have the time to do that. But it's been interesting just to see the second it clicks with the field, then it just instantly takes off. I mean, every success story I've had is we went to a project, found something that was missing, found something that was misaligned, found something that we're able to save the project money. The superintendent went from, I just want once a month drone photos, to once a week, to every day, to on one of my jobs. Like, he's like, I want you to do it first thing in the morning and right after lunch, like fly the drone as often as we can, because that's just the nature of, reality capture. If the field team loves it, then it's going to get used and it's going to get pushed, and then it gets moved up through the company and adopted very, very quickly.
Yeah, I do need a soundbite from you, Adam, of Feed the Field.
He is my stunt double, Brian. I think we just determined that. Awesome.
Well, I think, Jarvis, you also bring up such a good point of, like, not just relationships to the field, but relationships to your contact at those tech companies too, like, can bring some insight on how other companies of your size are doing it. I remember, and I'll be the first one to admit, like, I was probably the worst customer. Like, I would turn my camera off, and when renewal combos came up, I would, try to beat people up on pricing, and I didn't want to build a relationship. I kind of wanted just to like do it my way. And looking back on it, you realize that, like, the salesperson, CSM, like, those people are actually more on your side than you realize. And I think it's cool that you've kind of been back and forth, because you're like, oh wow, being on the tech side, I realized the tech managers who kind of worked with us the most, we were able to help a lot in a lot of creative ways.
Yeah, if you want to have tech on a single project, go through the tech manager and have them push it on a pilot job. If you want to have it on every single job within a GC or something, go get a superintendent to be like, holy smokes, this is something. Yeah, there you go.
Did he pay Adam? Did you pay him to say that?
We might have had a pre-show meeting that I told him to say a few.
I get it.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm glad someone else is talking some sense on this podcast too.
Wow. There we go. Yeah, it is awesome. And Jarvis, man, we are super pumped that you're here, man. It's gonna be a fun run, and I just think it's, like I said, not only is your story enough to qualify you to be here, and way more experience than the three stooges over here that have been on, but I think that, man, it's just cool that you bring a lot of wisdom and just insight into things that you've seen, come together. And also, hey, like, don't go down this path. I've seen that happen before, and this could be something to be aware of. So good stuff. And yeah, man, excited to have you on. I'm going to move us over here into kind of the next segment that I think is, I don't know, fellas, I've been pretty interested in this. I mean, we're just cresting into March here with, I need to play my March Madness jingle, because you guys know March is my favorite month. But yeah, it's exciting that, like, the start of the year, you guys always know, like, CES or Consumer Electronics Show kicks off the year in Vegas, and it gets everyone excited. And yeah, yeah, I feel like the January, February timeframe is always new hardware. Everyone's got their Christmas gift cards that they're burning a hole in their pocket and excited to get out there. But yeah, it's been interesting to see some of this new hardware, I think, come out and not just come out, but like 2 or 3 iterations of things. And 5 years ago we were talking about new consumer hardware, but now we're talking about new enterprise hardware, which is even, I think, more exciting for a lot of folks that tune into this and obviously are here to further their business of what it is that, hardware they're investing in. And so, yeah, I just wanted to camp here for a little bit of just kind of hearing your guys' thoughts on new hardware that's come out and things that you guys have heard and seen, and or maybe hardware that hasn't come out that's been leaked or teased, and that you guys have kind of seen into. So I'll kick things off and kind of move over here into the second topic of, obviously we've seen all the stuff from DJI of the Dock 3 coming out, and Dock 2 just came out last year, which is fascinating that they're already on a 3rd iteration of this. And I feel like some of the big changes on this is like, hey, you can put it in a truck, which I don't know, Adam, if you, King Superintendent, wants this thing in his back of his truck and wants to launch this thing out of his back, truck bed. It's been interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, what's kind of been things that have stood out to you guys for new hardware that's popped out, and or even just Dock, as you guys have seen some of these on site and heard from customers in particular of just how this is really changing the way that they not only document but do it on a more consistent schedule. So Adam, anything that, I mean, we were on some job sites last week that we got to see this firsthand on Dock 2 that was just installed, and I mean, it's crazy. It just like looks normal. It's sitting on top of a Connex. It's going out there and flying and capturing this stuff. And yeah, I mean, what hardware have you kind of seen that's really started to kind of bolster some of the excitement from the field side?
I mean, definitely sticking to the Dock kind of conversation segue there, to your point about superintendent truck beds, whatnot. Like, I think that's definitely more of a, to Jarvis's point, the regional tech truck bed type thing. And I see that being mobile in being the value in putting it into the truck bed is like job site to job site to job site, where, you don't have to buy one necessarily to stick it on job site. You can move them around. But to your point about the job we were on last week, yeah, I think that that Dock posted up there, set up in kind of a permanent way on top of the Connex, just out of everybody's way, just sitting at the top of the, overlook that little eye in the sky, overlooking, making sure all that job site is doing well. It just felt pretty natural, right? Like, it's a new thing on a job site that really doesn't stick out. It doesn't, it's unassuming enough that feels like it really has legs in terms of getting adopted. So, that's kind of my big takeaway on the hardware stuff. Obviously, last week we talked a bit about the robotics, more the functional robotic stuff that we're seeing on job sites. So, yeah, I don't know that I have a ton to add on the hardware side of things, other than just my surprise at how sort of easy these things are looking on job sites. And, the really getting to the people part of it, the meetings that we had, what we heard, and this is, a derivative of that hardware being there, is what we heard is that the data flowing on that project is just so much more consumable. Superintendents are engaging with it more. They were, I don't want to say unaware. They definitely know it's there, but like, they don't know how often it flew, right? They were just consuming data in the platform and really driving insights on their job site. So I think the hardware is the, unsung hero in the background amongst the field people. As long as I'm getting better data, more data, that's really where the hardware is going to shine.
Yeah. Brian, I got a little segment on the ticker down here at the bottom of just like, stuff gets announced and, it's either pre-launch or it's, not available until 3-4 weeks out, like, or even maybe 3 or 4 months out. But yeah, like, what's your take on, as new hardware comes out and it's, not available off the shelf, maybe like other consumer products are, you got to wait and, go through tariffs obviously are a pretty hot topic right now of just availability of certain hardware. Like, what do you feel like it's more harmful than helpful of, these announcements and these new hardware pieces coming out? And it's like, well, I can't even get this thing for 3 or 4 months.
I mean, realistically, a lot of people still need time to procure the budget for these things. It's just like, I don't know too many companies that the second something drops, they just are ready to spend $40,000-$50,000 that same week.
It's like Black Friday for a company, they're like waiting in the Best Buy line of like, come on, open the doors.
Yeah, pretty much. I think specifically with the M4E though, something I've been noticing is a lot of our demo requests that have been coming in for people that want to look at drone deploy companies are a lot of them are saying, "Hey, we just ordered a Mavic 4 Enterprise," and to me that's been more shocking because for the longest time, the DJI Mavic Air 2S was like dominating the market. High accuracy RTK workflows weren't necessarily like as big of a deal, and now it seems like these enterprise level drones, despite DJI kind of blocking out the SDK for the Mavic 3 Pro to be able to use for mapping, I actually do believe it probably had a positive effect on the industry, especially for these larger companies. It kind of forced people to spend a little more on these Mavic 3 enterprises, albeit it's not as scalable to every project, but it has kind of brought the expectation of what they should be spending on drones, and it's not $800 to $1,000 anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting that, obviously you pay more, you're going to get more value, right? So it's like the cost of some of these new enterprise pieces of hardware. Even, I mean, we haven't even talked about ground, 360 capture of like the cost changes of like a $400 camera to an $800 camera, and just the differences, within that. But Jarvis, I'm kind of curious, like, Adam and I were on a job last week that is maybe 2 or 3 generations old of hardware, and it's like from a job site's perspective, they're like, well, no, man, I'm going to use this thing until it breaks, it drops, it can't work, the battery's dead. Like,
What fall off?
yeah, right. And I think like, what's your take on a job site's kind of perspective on not necessarily thinking the need for new hardware, but obviously they're out on, socials and seeing, announcements and new release posts. Like, do you feel like the average job site is like excited about new hardware because it could like bring efficiency, or is, maybe against it from like, oh no, I got to go invest in a new thing, I just bought this one? Like, yeah, just maybe level set us at a project level of what you've kind of heard and seen with all these announcements and all these new pieces of tech that are coming out.
Yeah, I was actually chatting with a customer last week, and when they were talking about they had a Mavic Air 2S and they had a Mavic 2 Pro. So to go from that mindset of drones are $1,000 to, well, if I want to use an enterprise level piece of equipment, it's going to be a few thousand, was a hard pill for them to swallow initially. I think everything could be traced back to how much is it saving me from a perspective of time. So when I was chatting with this customer, I said, how many GCPs are we setting up on your 100-acre site in order for us to get a good high resolution, high accuracy map? You guys are in the excavation phase. How many times are those being kicked up by the excavators? How many times are those being run over by the dozers? How many times are those being covered up in dirt piles? So if we go from kind of the consumer level drone to the enterprise level drone, we can cut your time from getting the surveyors on site and getting kind of easier collection done. So it's definitely a jump. It's hard for people to kind of say, man, I'm used to buying $1,000 consumer level drone and getting enterprise level, results and stuff. But to be able to go from like this high accuracy, better workflow, in my opinion, not having to spend so much time in the field collecting, not spending so much time in the field as a layout guy, like, and just get better stuff. It's worth the investment. And that's something that's, I think, is the next conversation, because DJI especially has gone from that consumer to enterprise, and there's been a cost jump with it.
I give you a quick example. For example, I have the iPhone 13 Pro, right? To me, I try to use my iPhone until it pretty much doesn't work. But I'm starting to realize the battery is dying constantly and it's getting in my way.
Thanks,
And
Apple.
I'm like,
Not to throw some shade there, but
yeah, and I go to the T-Mobile store the other day and I'm like, great, like what's the latest iPhone? They're like the 16 Pro. I'm like, great, when's the 17 coming out? And they're like,
how do you
oh,
not know that, Brian? I feel like that's a crazy thing for you not to know what.
Honestly, the reason I even have the
Brian thing ever.
The reason I only have the 13 was because I was bullied to get it from someone who made fun of me. But that's a whole nother story. And I was like, great, well, when's the 17 coming out? And they're like, September. I'm like, do I really like? Normally, I was like, all right, maybe I'll just wait till the 17. But what is the difference between the 16 and the 17 to me is going to be so minimal. But the jump between the 13 to the 16 is dramatic. I believe, like even just new buttons or just like the interface of it. But
New buttons.
that,
I mean, yeah, that's fair.
yeah, it's got one new button, and
We're all
then
Apple guys here, right? I mean, we're all in the blue camp. Yeah, that's what I thought. All right.
I think Jarvis is just, I think he's one of those microchips in his head. He just uses that.
Yeah, his phone calls actually come through his earpiece. It is interesting, Brian. Like, I think that, well, two things. One, Jarvis, I think you make an interesting point of like the sell to reinvest is almost the same sell to invest, meaning that, hey, like to go and get a drone, there's a whole different set of like, how do you go prove its value? And now you're going through that same case again to prove its value from now an efficiency standpoint. Because I think you make a good point. It's like, hey, if this can, reduce the number of, GCPs or time in the air or just like logistics of you connecting a phone to your controller, like there are additional efficiency gains that, help an end user saying like, hey, like this is going to make a ton of sense, right? Like it's a different sell than it is for the first initial sell, which is pretty fascinating. But then Brian, I think you bring up another good point of like, hey, if the incremental change from new piece of hardware to the next piece of hardware isn't substantial, like, hey, take heart, like you're using a great piece of, hardware that you may be just fine with, and like waiting maybe another, iteration, or I think some of these new enterprise units, like their changes from unit to unit. It's like now it's on like a 2-year refresh cycle. Not to say, obviously they're releasing them every year, but it is fascinating how you can maybe go a little longer on these enterprise tools, just because it was such a big jump from, hey, this is a consumer product to now this is an enterprise product. Any thoughts to that, fellas? Like I think you both bring up some pretty interesting points.
So the most irritating thing about when I went to the T-Mobile store is at first I had, a potential promotion to give, $500 for my current phone if I traded it in. And then all of a sudden that promotion disappeared when I came back the second time. And I'm like, well, and I think a lot of the tough thing is like you have something that technically still works and it almost feels like you're wasting the hardware. But I would almost have a plan on when we phase out hardware, like say like our top 20% of projects within a company should be should have the best hardware out there. And then maybe we phase out like the Mavic 2 or the Air 2Ss to some projects that may not have the budget for something or may not need that type of scale. And I think there should be some sort of like system or SOP about which projects get what type of hardware, what they need.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting.
Also,
go for it.
I was also going to say, like, in terms of hardware adoption, like, I almost don't want the first version of something, right? Like, I want them to figure out the kinks and the bugs, and like, I think we all know that the first version or the best one on the market, if it is a completely new generation of something, I'm going to wait. I'm going to let all those bleeding edge folks go figure out the bugs, and especially if I am, to your point, Brian, one of those top 20% companies. Those top 20% companies are going to probably invest a ton of money into the next iteration of their own programs. I don't want to invest that money in that first wave of stuff that inevitably is probably going to break a little bit. I want to get the tried and true. Give me version 2 and version 3, like what we're seeing with Dock 3 now. It's probably the one that I would invest in, right? Dock 1 and 2 had their own things. So Dock 3 is the one I'm going for. So that's kind of my mentality. Call it old school, call it field, call it whatever. But yeah, that may be the way I go with it.
It's really because you're waiting to put it in the back of your truck. Like we all know that's really what's going on, or on top of the camper van. I mean,
I just needed it to come down, the price point to come down before I mount one on top of the van. That's for sure.
And it's like, hey, it can take on so much more snow and cold winter. I'm looking at you two there, like, oh yeah, we're finally waiting for some cold, weather gear. It is fascinating because, yeah, I mean, I think, Adam, to your point, like a lot of people would say that, right? It's like, hey, wait for the second, wait for the third generation. That's fine. But it is tricky when you don't know some of those, like when that's going to happen, right? Like now we've seen the history of Dock 1. It looks like Dock 2 is, a year out from that. Dock 3 obviously was a year out from Dock 2 release. And so it is interesting to kind of like get a baseline of like, and Brian, to your point with the iPhone, it's like, well, we know their release schedule. It's just about every year. You get into kind of the March, April timeframe, and it's like, well, maybe I should just wait till October when the new one comes out. So I feel like there's enough information, at least from a historical standpoint, on the enterprise pieces of hardware that, yeah, I think just bode for a little bit more informed decision, to your point, Adam, of like, well, where are you going to make your investments in? Is it going to be the newest of new and be okay with working out the bugs or waiting for some of the software side to catch up? Because, here we are trying to, innovate and implement on top of these things as they come out too. And that's, sometimes tricky with the limitations that we have.
I think it also comes down to the company's brand. Like, I think the amount of memes you see about Tim Cook, like getting excited to release the most mid type of release every year. They're like, great, an iPad, like sweet. Like nobody really cares. And that, I think it kind of cuts the brand a little bit, but it works great for the profits. I would say that I think DJI has definitely made some pretty big improvements going to the Mavic 3 Enterprise. I think Insta360 did a great job with the RS 1-inch, but the X series to me kind of let me down a little bit. Like an X2 to an RS 1-inch was a major jump. The X2 to the X3 was like, all right. I'm still kind of feeling out. I think the X4 is a bigger jump than the X2, but yeah, it just depends on what the X5 is going to look like or the X6.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you bring up a good point. We're obviously talking about consumer products that now have become enterprise. Insta, not quite yet with, an enterprise type of a tool. But I mean, we haven't even talked about other reality capture tools, right? Like the laser scanning side of it. I mean, you talk about the RTC from Leica. That's a flagship product that's been out for, fact check me here, but it's like 5+ years, right? Or 6, 7+ years now. It feels like that thing is never changing. I mean, that is like the workhorse, the F-150 of the scanning side of like, it just gets work done, and it's, a great tool. And so it's hard when you kind of
Jeep Raptor.
That's what you're calling the RTC? That's interesting.
No, I think it's fine.
The Raptor was made by Jeep. That's really the biggest problem with this discussion.
Oh, sorry, not the Jeep Raptor, the Gladiator, Renegade, Gladiator, whatever.
And Brian is off the show. There it is.
Come on, Brian. I'm going to take one more. I'm going to take one more of the field curmudgeon sort of approaches to this discussion, and maybe something that I think you asked Jarvis Grant around, like how the field looks at tech adoption, or I should say hardware. I should say. At the end of the day, I don't care. Like I don't care what hardware anybody used, as long as it's producing results, right? As long as it's producing data.
Yeah, but you care when it's like, hey, if I'm walking around with a 3-4-year-old 360 camera and you go into rooms that are poorly lit and you're like, well, I can't see anything. And it's like, well, hey, have you tried to get to the newest camera, and do you have some auxiliary lighting? Like, I think you care.
Or you're using a Leica P30 and your job gets billed twice the amount because an RTC could have done it in half.
We're talking about field.
I think Adam's right.
Consumer side of things. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Adam's right though, because like the field doesn't care until it becomes a problem. So the field doesn't care what if you're using a Phantom 1, a Phantom 2 until it becomes, oh, this room is super blurry, I can't see it. But then they're also the first ones to say, here's the card, go buy it. Go buy whatever the new thing is so that we don't have this problem. And it's that quick. It's that quick of a decision.
Or they're the first ones to say, get this crap off my job because it doesn't work anymore, right? Like, and they don't understand, hey, it's actually a hardware issue, and we just go spend $1,000, we get a new thing, and look, our problem is solved. I'm in the middle of one of those discussions right now where we have with migration and a lot of the things going on, we have one particular project that's just got some issues, and they're throwing their hands up. And it's like, wait a second, guys, you're using literally the first Insta360 camera available to the market that I bought 7 years ago, but when I worked there, and they're still using it on the same job because, again, running it till the wheels fall off, and they just don't know to make a change to better improve their life, to better set up a job. Oh yeah, we already have this one on the shelf. It just goes to the next job. And then it goes to the next job, and all of a sudden it's going to die. So, to Jarvis, well said, and thank you for putting a bow on that, is like, they don't care until it becomes a problem and I don't get the data that I need. So as long as data is still flowing, as long as the information is still good, I'm a happy camper,
I think we won't talk about this now, but maybe another button for a segment later is like, who the hell manages all this hardware? I mean, can we talk about that for a second of like who... Like, who's the one responsible for being like, yep, I tested it. It works within our workflows. Here's what doesn't work within our, support. And because, just think of like when people go out and buy hardware and think that it's going to be working with, Brian, you mentioned a little bit of like the Mavic 2 to Mavic 3 scenario of like, well, everyone goes out and didn't want to buy a Mavic 3 Enterprise because it was 2 or 3 times the cost that they go out and buy a Mavic 3. that came out after, by the way. Or no, actually, I think it came out before the Mavic 3 Enterprise. And it was like, I'm going to buy this because I don't want the Enterprise version. And it's like, well, now in a lot of ways, it's like being patient or just waiting for more information there could have been interesting. The hardware side of it is just fascinating because, Brian, you mentioned before of like how these tech manager and innovation manager roles have really obviously skyrocketed in the last 10 years. But are they the ones that are managing hardware? Like, are they now kind of a version of IT that manages the laptops that go out within the company? And it's just I don't know. It's just such a crazy web of a complexity. I mean, but we're talking about, drones and 360 cameras, but I mean, we're talking about laser scanners too. I mean, those aren't cheap. They're $100,000 investments if you get some super, I don't know. It's just the managing of hardware that brings back some PTSD for me. Cause I'm like, how do you know how to do it? How do you tag everything? Jobs are going to go out and buy their own hardware if they see some flashy new marketing ad and, want to go buy it. But I don't know. Jarvis, I know you've probably gone through that too, of just like that being its own sheer job.
Yeah, I think the best scenario would be to kind of have, most of these GCs and stuff, they have their warehouses, their OESs, their, equipment companies and stuff that they can rent stuff back to the job. I think the best relationship and the best kind of path forward is having a tech manager that a PE, a superintendent, a PM says, we'd like to have a new drone. And the IT manager, tech manager, whatever you want to call them, says, here's the drones that currently exist that we would recommend. We'll buy you one. And then it's run through that kind of equipment rental facility. Instead of kind of every job willy-nilly just going and buying one, because then you'll get back and it's like, oh, this drone doesn't work with Drone Deploy, which we have an enterprise agreement with, or, oh, this 360 camera doesn't allow me to integrate with an iPhone or Android. So I think just having that balance of the IT manager doesn't dictate what you buy, but they can advise you and then hold your hand a little bit to get acclimated to it. I think that's the best relationship and role for them.
Whew, we could camp there for a while. Lots to talk about there, maybe for another spicy day of sorts. But yeah, I just think hardware, it's fascinating. January, February, March, first part of the year, call it Q1. It is just a lot of stuff going on in this camp and plenty to talk about. But let's get into this last topic here and we'll close things out of just, I guess, Adam, we were thinking about this topic of growth, that project that we visited, having a doc and seeing the growth of this team from, 2 years ago to really where they are today. I mean, it's fascinating to see how hardware can be a catalyst for growth. It can also be a catalyst for a lack of growth. But yeah, I just want to camp here for a little bit of kind of some success stories or things that you guys have seen, maybe correlations from, company to company or project team to project team of like, what does it truly look like to go from like 1 to 5 projects or 5 to 10 projects? Like, where is the hardest part of growth? What is some of the things that cause us the most challenges, the correlations that we've seen? Yeah, I guess, Brian, I'll kick it down to you because I know, again, you've visited a ton of jobs and seen some things that have kind of correlated to this. And we can go down the office versus field growth. Jarvis, you talked a little bit at the front end of, hey, like growth is going to, just fire rocket off of, field implementation. So yeah, I just want to camp here for a second of like, what have we seen that has caused really, I would say, scalable growth and sustainable growth? Brian, I'm just curious to hear kind of some of the thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to just say, there's a couple different ways you could go about a strategy, whether it's, hey, I'm just going to focus on specific market sectors, or I'm going to focus on the projects that make up 80% of our company's revenue, which tend to be maybe 20% of the projects, right? All the big ones, and then attack the ones later. Or I'm going to start with the most enthusiastic people. But whatever you end up doing, having some sort of like systematic way to make sure the timing of when you introduce something is early on enough is probably, I think, the biggest factor that I've seen in like why things work. There's a metric that we started using just like called time to value. So if I'm introducing a field team for the first time, what a 360 camera can do, I'm going to want to make sure maybe it's around the time they're about to close up walls, where those photos instantly become valuable maybe the next day or the next week, right? I want them to, if they have an owner that's on the other side of the country, I'm going to have them capture the day before their OAC meeting, right? And like understanding the timing and giving them that aha moment as soon as possible equals success in my mind. sometimes people will just show up to a job, not even have an idea of where the project really is or what they care about. They don't ask the team what they're trying to solve or what their biggest thorn in their side is. They just go capture, and then they're like, hey, here you go. I added you. Do it, and then leave. And I think having that relationship, and I think the biggest thing I've learned on the tech side, specifically, I guess, like in any of my time in sales, like sales adjacent stuff, is like ask questions of what people really care about. One project might be, hey, this owner PM is on us heavy, is asking us. I'm getting texts every single day. Hey, do you have photos from this? Do you have photos from that? Another project might say, hey, we have this very intricate curtain wall system that we're going to be installing. Right. So I think just asking questions and timing of the project is probably the most important thing I've seen.
Yeah, I think, Adam, what's been interesting too is, we've been fortunate to be invited into some of these, call it company meetings, kind of corporate gatherings, whatever you want to call it, of trainings, I guess you could call it. This last one that we went to here before the end of the year was just a huge superintendent field huddle, right? And there's like 2 days, 50 individuals from out in the job site that came in to, obviously we were one part of this kind of corporate superintendent huddle within this company, but the topics that they talked about, obviously all relevant, and they asked us to come and do kind of a presentation so that everyone kind of within the team was aware of that. But I mean, would you say obviously that's one part of kind of the equation for growth, but when you think of the disconnectedness of field teams of, hey, do you just go militia style 1-to-1-to-1 and kind of knock on, job site fences, see growth, or do you kind of look for those catalyst moments of, hey, when do you guys all meet together? I want to take advantage of the face-to-face time, you guys seeing, who we are and the tools that we're using. Like, which one kind of stands out the most? Because that was like the first time. One, it was awesome to be invited to come to that, as this team had asked us to, and then to do it over 2 days and see that room just packed of, superintendents. Like, we went around the room and it was, I've been here for 5 years, I've been here for 30 years, I've been here and it was just fascinating to me that was such a unique moment that, again, this team happened to be the one that, we went out and visited on dock and saw all that stuff too. And it's been interesting to just watch their just growth, exponential growth, you could argue, over time. But yeah, what stands out to you when you think of growth, just with the challenge of separated field teams?
I think Jarvis hit it earlier with, the difference between top down and bottom up. I think that the real secret sauce is the social credibility amongst the different job sites. So if you can find, we'll stick to superintendents, right? You find the superintendent, the PM, PE combo at one job that really tends to, maybe they're a little more forward thinking. I think to Brian's point, there's a strategy in which team you may implement something with, because you'll have a higher adoption or higher success rate with a certain group of individuals than maybe another group. So if you are a tech manager or whatever, like, evaluate who your guinea pigs are going to be to start with. And then when you do have a team that gravitates towards something, find something that works for the field, enable and empower that group to spread the word, right? Because as a superintendent, we have a tech manager, or we have somebody that's, telling me about new tech that's available to me. I'm going to hear the value prop. I'm going to understand, hey, what the proposed value is. But until I hear it from another superintendent who's like, hey man, do you guys have this thing on your job site yet? That's when my ears perk up. That's when, I really want to try that out. That's when I'm probably going to call my tech manager and be like, hey man, how come Steve over there has this cool new stuff and I don't have it on my job, right? So I think to your point, Grant, like, one of the pillars of our community efforts are really connecting job to job, and highlighting the successes of one project's use of technology, just their forward-thinking nature, and promoting that within their company to drive that social credibility. So I think that's a huge piece in growth or scalability, is winning the field with the tools that you're proposing.
Yeah, Jarvis, what's interesting, I know you have some opinions on this too, of just the differences between hard facts and numbers and the narrative of stories, and how that just changes the dynamic of what's impactful to who. At a job level, it's for sure more story related than it maybe is. Hard facts are always helpful, but we've talked about on here, gosh, a handful of times, of like the difference between, a narrative approach of sharing those stories to like, hey, what is the hard numbers of hours and dollars and things like that. Say, anything that you've kind of seen, whether in the industry side at the company level or on the tech side too, of that has been kind of what tactics you use with certain individuals.
Yeah, to answer your question, Grant, numbers without a story just kind of fall on deaf ears. It seems like I was at a project engineer breakfast, like at the very beginning of my career. And we had, I think of it was a vendor. I can't remember who it was, but they came and they showed us like, hey, we could save you X, amount of time on submittals and RFIs if you use this. And for us, that was really cool. The PMs, PXs, and the superintendents heard that same story by the software. But the second it was like on a job, the salesperson was able to work on a job and say, see how much time we were able to save Jarvis and Trevor and Cameron on your project so they could do XXX. It was the same numbers, but it was a story that those PMs could relate to. That software started to get rolled out on other projects. And it's kind of the same thing, Adam was talking about, that it's not just the story, it's the audience. So, when I was at Project Atlas, I went to a design firm and presented on Atlas to a lot of the VPs, a lot of the decision makers, a lot of the people that hold the strings to the budget and stuff. And we got like nothing. And then a week later, I just reached out to one of the supers and the PXs that I knew and said, hey, could I just come walk with you and just see how we could set this up? This is what I need from you. And then 2 months later, they were presenting back to all of their peers. And we had this huge flood of like, can you guys come set up Atlas on our job? Can you come set up Atlas on our job? So even though you have like the stories and the people, like until they hear it from their own folks, it's not really applicable or accepted. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, Adam, how many times do you feel like we get asked like, hey, what's the secret sauce? Like, hey, what are we doing wrong or what are we doing different? And I hate to share a little bit of how the sausage is made. There is no secret sauce. Like there is no like, hey, I got this thing on the shelf back over here that is just going to fix all your problems. But I think you bring up, I mean, probably one of the most tried and true points that I've felt I've said, Jarvis, is like, it's so different when it comes from us, or call it in the tech world, versus your jobs, your people, your projects, your wins. Like even just who articulates that is so different. Now, I think we have a huge part to play in that. We, as the kind of tech side, of like helping elevate those stories, to Adam's point, connecting jobs and regions that you as maybe the manager may not even know about happening. Like that's for sure a part we can play. Like I think that's the interesting part of the scenario is like, it's just like a basketball team. You guys know I love a good sports analogy, right? Like, each player has a role and has a function. And in a way, I feel like we kind of play point guard, shooting guard a little bit of like, we rack up the assists. Like we're not there to score the points. Like we're there to really help pass the ball and get you guys into, certain positions to dunk it, oop it, drain the three and, have the opportunity to really score some points with your own team. But you can go out there and score 50 on any given night and not take any assists and that can be a win. But that sounds exhausting to drop 50, like it's interesting. I hope that more and more people, projects, companies see us as, someone that can help you in that endeavor. But hey, when the rubber meets the road, like it's got to come from your teams and it's got to come from their voices. And hopefully we can help, put logs in that fire that help sustain and burn that in a way that, keeps you guys kind of motivated. But yeah, Brian, any thought? I know you got some.
I will say that, like, I think to your point about no secret sauce, I do think that I've identified a secret sauce, and it's going to be a, again, broken record scenario here, but if you can find a superintendent that is forward thinking,
superintendent.
Yeah, super sauce, whatever you want to call it, right? Like that is where I think we have seen the most, whether it's reality capture, anything, like, I mean, truly anything, whether it's just, an Apple TV plugged in, unit to a television, as opposed to taking the HDMI cord and putting it in the laptop. Like that is one of those things that, I mean, 10 years ago, one of my superintendents was like, hey, we can get rid of all these stupid wires. I don't have to sit at that end of the table if we just go buy this thing I just got for my house. Oh yeah, great idea. You know what I mean? So like, if you can find the superintendent that is forward thinking, wants to be, at least open to the idea of new things. They don't have to be the most innovative. They don't have to be the most like tech forward, just open-minded. Find you an open-minded superintendent, put some good tools in their hands, they will very quickly tell you, hey, this sucks, I don't want it anymore, or they will very quickly take it, adopt it, and it will catch wildfire. That's the secret sauce, in my opinion.
Brian, put a bow on us here. We'll land the plane. And
yeah, I think just the last thing there is I noticed some of the best technology managers come from the field. It's like an APM that says, hey, I actually want to make a career change, and I want to do this more for the rest of the teams that, I mean, Adam, you yourself, I know you never became a technology manager within the company, but same Jarvis, like you tested a lot of these things on your projects and you were like, great, I want to do this. I want to do this the best for my own product. And now I want to tell people about it and I can actually change people's lives. And I felt the problem. But yeah, I've been seeing a good amount of innovation roles get created in like a lot of these mid-market companies from just APMs that are like, great, I can keep my APM work in the meantime and start implementing some new things if you just give me a little bit of money and some time.
Yeah, it's I think it's fascinating. Adam over here thinks he's got the super sauce, secret sauce, which I do think is true, by the way. I don't want to discredit that, but yeah, I mean, it's hard though too. I mean, Adam, some of these jobs we went to, and we're like, hey, what's going on in that room over there where the supers are sitting there? I go, no, not having it. And it's like, well, man, like, but they unlock a lot of things, and so it's hard. I think
one of the supers that came out of that room though was one that's eyes lit up when we showed him some new things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I bet you that room gets a little infusion of some of the stuff that we saw, or some of the stuff that we showed him moving forward. So.
Yeah, well said. I mean, this topic alone, I feel like we'll probably hit on it 3 or 4 times as we talk about some of these topics or segments. But yeah, it's just super interesting. I mean, a lot of things to kind of camp on there. But Jarvis, man, we're pumped that you're here. Obviously, infusing in a lot of wisdom, a lot of just background and stuff. And I would argue has probably the best looking goatee and facial hair of all 3 of us here. Brian, you got to catch up at some point. But
Brian's second though.
This is there you go. This is like probably like 2 or 3 weeks of growing facial hair. I don't grow anything, man.
No, it looks good. I mean,
this is all I can grow, Brian. So
no, my arms, legs, nothing.
There it is. Now we're ending talking about facial hair. I love it. Fellas, great time. Good stuff. Love having you on here. Jarvis is going to be a good time. And we've got some fun, exciting things we're going to announce next week too that hopefully you'll be interested to hear. And I hope you guys just enjoyed tuning in with us. It's been fun to chat about some of these things today. And yeah, hit us up on LinkedIn, drop some comments, anything stand out. We'd love to hear just other topics or things that stand out to you all, and look forward to catching you on the next one. So fellas, we'll take care and we'll see you next week.